So I've done a number of videos on the Kerch Bridge and what was going on, and was it a legitimate target, or how RT was carrying the reports about the Kerch and that kind of thing. And I've also done a number of videos about Scott Ritter. And we're going to look at Scott Ritter's view of how the Kerch Bridge was attacked. Now, it was in this video by Stephen Gardner, and I'm just telling you, it's the funniest thing that the YouTube play button was put right where it was, because it just looks perfect. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole video, but we're going to see about 10 minutes worth of Scott Ritter talking with my commentary. Okay, here we go.
So that was one thing, but in order to make that viable, you still needed to have, the economic connectivity, and that's what the bridge did. Putin, by building this bridge, sent a signal that he is committed to making Crimea part of Russia, that Russia should be committed. It was a bridge that united Russia with Crimea and Vladimir.
And that's a fair point, and that's exactly why the bridge was such a phenomenal target for the Ukrainians, that the Russians, who stole their land, built a bridge from their perspective. The Russians stole their land and then built a bridge from their country to this country to connect this stolen land. So it makes sense that this would become a legitimate target. Now we're going to hear Scott Ritter's view of how this actually happened, or how this attack actually went off. It's fascinating. I would take it with a grain of salt. He might be right, but he could also be way out in left field. But let's hear what he has to say.
Vladimir Putin has his name written all over it. So yeah, by attacking this is putting a thumb in the eye of Vladimir Putin and his project. So I think Ukrainians are accomplishing both objectives by attacking this bridge. And that's why the Russian response is going to be of an order of magnitude greater than it would be normally, because there's not just the military aspect of this attack, but there's the political aspect.
And the Russian response has been all out of proportion as well. One attack on the Kerch Bridge led to 150 to 200 attacks all over Odesa, the Danube, and all over the lower southwestern end of Ukraine.
And just to be clear, it looks like this looks like something out of a Mission Impossible movie, but basically they took a remote control jet ski loaded with explosives and ran it into the bridge at about 3 a.m. Russian time. Is that your understanding?
Okay, and that is what we know. Now, the how Scott Ritter is going to get into, and this is a little questionable because we don't know exactly how. We know what, but we don't know how. But let's hear his take.
Standing.
Well, I don't know if they've actually identified. I mean, that's a weapon they've used in the past.
Okay.
But another weapon that they're talking about is a Remus 600 or something of that nature, which is an underwater drone that has some explosive capabilities. It could be a demining drone that you use to take in and you find a mine and you blow it up. And it was packed with even additional explosives, and that this was used. And what's interesting, if you use the Remus, because of its limited range, the Ukrainians would have had to have a commando team on board one of these ships that leaves.
Now, we're not sure if it's the Remus or the jet ski. From what I understand, it was the jet ski with a remote control of some sort. But here's how he's going to process what actually happened. The commando team.
Odesa with the grain. And that ship goes through what they call the Green Corridor, which is a safe corridor that the Russian Navy has stayed out of. And while it's going through the Green Corridor, the commandos would have gotten off the boat with this drone and then infiltrated closer to the bridge. The commandos would have been physically close enough to guide the drone to the bridge. So it's more like Mission Impossible than you could possibly think of. And that's it. But that's another reason why the Russian response will be the way it is, because from the Russians, this isn't just an attack; it's a betrayal. It shows that Ukrainians have
so the Russians, they were in good faith holding up to the grain deal, and it's those treacherous Ukrainians. That's what he's trying to say, and that this is the narrative carried in RT.
Operated in good faith about the grain deal. That the grain deal is always about empowering Ukraine to do things that otherwise wouldn't be permitted. And that's why I think you're seeing the harsh response by Russia.
And there were things that were normal business before Russia came into its neighbor's country with almost 200,000 troops and started causing mayhem. So let's kind of be fair about how that actually works.
Over Odesa that we saw last night.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So people are saying Putin's not wasting any time getting revenge. He's already hit the port city of Odesa with a massive missile strike. Do you see that as the end of it, or do you think that was just already a planned attack, or is something bigger coming as far as a revenge attack for the explosion of this key piece of infrastructure, this bridge?
Now, Scott may or may not be right about what he has to say, but it certainly is an interesting perspective. So listen to this.
I think the Russians had a package already prepared. Look how quickly this was done. Yeah. So the Russians had a prepared package. They had systems identified. They had the targets identified. It was all wired in. So basically, the Russian leadership picked up the phone and said, fire Alpha Bravo 1001, a pre-planned fire mission against pre-designated targets. The question now becomes, why did Russia wait so long to do this? I mean, if these were targets that were known, why weren't they struck before? Why hadn't Russia taken these targets out prior to this? And the answer is that Russia was trying to operate in good faith about the grain deal.
Because Russia always operates in good faith when you listen to Ritter. I don't think that the grain deal is connected to the Kerch bridge. I think these are separate things that we're going to get rid of the grain deal. And I'm going to show you something. So these are videos in RT, and it appears to me that what Russia was going to do was end the grain deal and destroy the ports, the grain, all the infrastructure that they could in Ukraine so that they could have leverage with Africa. Now, why am I saying that? If you go back and you look over RT's videos over the last day, it's really interesting how much has been come up about Africa. So they're doing something that they did just before the grain deal. They were trying to use grain or food as leverage with the southern hemisphere, and they're back to these same tricks. Go back before the grain deal and see Lavrov's goodwill tour in Africa and that kind of thing, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So here, let's just look at recent news over the last day or so. Putin holds meetings with African delegations. South Africa foreign minister speaks to RT. Putin holds meetings with the prime minister of Ethiopia. African nations interested in cooperation with Moscow. Now, normally you'll see a little bit about Africa, but not this much. Daughter of Mozambique president speaks to RT ahead of a Russian Africa summit. Now, that African summit's coming up, and it's no surprise to me that the grain deal was ended and the ports are destroyed and the grain's destroyed just before that, because this was an intentional, to my mind, from everything that I can see, an intentional thing to end the grain deal and try to say, Africa, if you want your grain, we're your guy. And that's how I think it's going to work. I can't say for 100% that that's what's going on, but it sure does line up that way. Okay, back to Ritter.
It's a point of some contention. Crimea is historically a Russian territory. In the 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev, who was at that time the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and himself an ethnic Ukrainian, gifted Crimea to Ukraine. There's various stories about why that happened. Some people say that it dealt with contractual complexities, meaning that entities that were in Ukraine who were trying to do business in Crimea, it just took too long for the contracts because one had to go through Moscow, the other through Kiev, and so to simplify this, they just simply made Crimea Kiev. Who knows? That's anecdotal. But the point is, the primarily ethnic Russian population of Crimea found itself in the Soviet Republic of Ukraine, which, given that the Soviet Union was run out of Moscow, wasn't the end of the world. But it became the end of the world for these people in 1991, 1992, when Ukraine became independent from the Soviet Union. And there began a long, decades-long gradual ramping up of animosity between the ethnic Russians of Crimea and the Ukrainian government, whom they believed treated them poorly because of their ethnic Russian status. There was also tension between Ukraine and Russia over the Sevastopol naval base. This is the key to Russia's security posture in the Black Sea. It's where the Black Sea Fleet is based out of. And so Russia, signed a leasing agreement with the Ukrainian government to keep the Russian fleet there and the Russian service members there. In 2014, there was a coup, a revolution.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there. There was not a coup. There was a Maidan revolution at the time. But let's go back and talk about what was going on in Crimea. In Crimea, now I saw this on Twitter and I thought this was a perfect metaphor for what's actually happened. So this is a map of, I saw somebody post the territories annexed to Ukraine. They're saying this is Ukrainian territory, and this was given by Vladimir Lenin, and this was by the Russian Tsars, and this was by Joseph Stalin, and this was by Nikita Khrushchev. Yes, but it's lying without lying, because at different points in history, this was still Ukraine. So it's not really fair to just point out these arbitrary dates when if you roll the clock back to different times, it actually was Ukraine. So what Ritter's saying is true, but it's kind of not at the same time. Okay, so back to what Ritter was saying, his broader point about how Russia is always operating in good faith and what's going on.
Why did Russia wait so long to do this? I mean, if these were targets that were known, why weren't they struck before? Why hadn't Russia taken these targets out prior to this? And the answer is that Russia was trying to operate in good faith about the grain deal, that they had basically said that Odesa is going to be fundamentally off limits, and Russia was living up to its obligation. This is a signal now that Russia's done with the grain deal, that they're going to start to view Odesa as a target. I don't think that this represents the end of the targeting. I think that there are other targets that have yet to be developed. For instance, those who planned this attack, those who carried out this attack. Russia is going to have to be more specific about who they were, and then Russia is going to find them and bring death and destruction upon them. I also think that Odesa's days of sleep-filled nights are over. I think you're going to see Russia seeking to make sure that Odesa cannot be used as a platform to continue attacks. The drone attacks are not only prepared and planned from Odesa, but for instance, last night there was a drone attack, the sea drone. There was an air drone attack. 32 airborne drones were launched by Ukraine from bases around Odesa against Crimea. All 32 drones were shot down. But from the Russian perspective, Odesa has become a launching pad of attacks against Crimea. And I think you're going to see Russia seeking to apply military solution to that problem, to eliminate Odesa as a source of continued military attacks against Crimea.
Okay. Now, is this an eye for an eye attack where it's like, hey, you're hitting our coastal town with access to the Black Sea, so now we're hitting you? Or do you think that they've been holding back, like you mentioned, till the grain thing was off? Or do you think because of the prior bridge attack that they've just been waiting, hey, if they hit us again, we're gonna let them know that was a bad move? Like you say, it does seem pre-calculated, and they were prepared. Otherwise, they couldn't have launched.
And that is the point. This was pre-calculated. The grain deal is not because of the Kerch, but the Russians are using the Kerch bridge attack to do what they wanted to do and when they already ended the grain deal, and they're going to destroy all the grain, saying this is payback for the Kerch. But that's because geopolitically they're trying to reposition themselves as the grain dealer to the southern hemisphere, in my estimation. I could be wrong. I'd love to hear what you say, because I don't have the corner of the market on truth, but that is my understanding of what's going on, of why and how the Kerch was hit and what's going to follow afterwards.
As they did.
I don't think it's an eye for an eye. I don't think Russia plays the eye for an eye game.
No, this is a eye, an ear, a nose, a throat, a mouth, a toe, an elbow for an eye. This is a disproportionate response by a long shot.
Russia's intent is to prevail in this conflict, and so they will hit the targets necessary to achieve their military and political objectives.
And that's fair. Russia is intending to prevail. They are not intending to go anywhere. And you can see this with the military age for reservists and active duty members raised. You can see this with the high school students now being taught in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade basic military training, because Russia's not planning on going anywhere.
I do believe that in the aftermath of the first attack against the bridge, that Russia prepared a pre-planned counterstrike that's updated continuously. That one of the jobs of the Russian intelligence officers, people who would, like myself, would have been to look over Odesa and say, okay, oh, look, they just put more fuel here. Let's upgrade that target. Let's make sure we have a cruise missile designated for that. Oh, look, they did this, they did that, they did this. And you build the target deck. You can say, oh, they're no longer doing this here. Let's take that off the target deck. And you keep the target deck updated so that it's relevant. And in doing so, you always allocate a weapon system to it. And so they had the pre-planned mission already in place, and that was done. But it's not an eye for an eye. I think it was definitely retaliation for the attack, but I also believe that there will be continued retaliation. I
Sure.
think that Russia is not going to be in the business of attacking, stopping, letting them attack the bridge again, attacking, stopping, letting them attack the bridge again. I think Russia is in the business of they're never going to attack the bridge again. And so they're going to do whatever it takes.
So I don't think that that's possible at all. I think the bridge will be attacked again, and the bridge will be taken out of commission eventually. Moscow will be attacked again, as probably will other cities within Russia, and the Ukrainians won't and can't stop. Okay, that's Scott Ritter's perspective on how the Kerch Bridge was attacked. I also talked about what the connection is between the Kirch and the grain deal. It's not direct, but it's then used as a pretext to strike Odesa really, really hard to get to their goals about the grain deal. And they're now courting African nations like they haven't been doing before, except before the original grain deal. So I hope that helps and adds some context to the way that you're understanding what's going on in the war. If this video was helpful to you, I'd appreciate a like, a share, a subscribe. You can buy me a cup of coffee if you'd like. You don't have to. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares enough to watch this video. And more than anything, thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.